It's the Misfits.
It really started when my grandmother was passing away. I was around 15, and I wasn't a believer at that point. She died. She was a believer, and I really struggled with that. Got into a lot of trouble and battled with a few addictions and stuff like that. And I remember just a guy from school, one of my teachers, just pulled me aside and said, you're basically on a path destruction. Would you come to church with me? And I was like, yeah, I've got nothing else to lose, I guess. And I did, and that was really a turning point in my life where I started reading the Bible for the first time. I had guys pouring into me a lot. They let me ask a lot of really difficult and hard questions. I didn't make it easy on anybody, but through patience and love and gentleness, they allowed me to, be in their space with them and ask questions. And that was the first turn towards faith when I started feeling a draw from God to have a relationship with Him. And that developed more and more as I graduated high school, joined the military, started thinking about death a lot more, and started going to a church. And then really, I think the big turning point was when I met my wife, and she started inviting me to go to church with her, and even more, just started to confirm in my life that God had a calling on it, and that kind of gets into the calling to ministry territory. But it was just a confirmation after confirmation that I was supposed to be on this journey, and it wasn't a journey that I chose. It really kind of chose me, but at each turn, I just kept trying to accept and submit to it. And so, yeah, that's the long short of the journey to faith. There's a lot more to it, but that's kind of where it started on the trajectory. So.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Ministry Misfits. Andrew, I believe if we're doing our math correct, we are on episode 5. Does that sound about right?
I don't even know.
Well, that's okay.
We just had this. I actually had this discussion on the Christian Podcasters Association this morning because it was another podcast that does Tuesdays, and they mentioned that there's actually an extra Tuesday every quarter if you release on Tuesdays. Didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
They also then so what do you do special for those extra Tuesdays? And I just put we're lucky if we even remember what day it is.
We're keeping track of the normal Tuesdays. Yeah. So it was fun the other week. We were trying to come up with some exclusive merch or different products for the Patreon site, and I think we created more so memes.
We got stuck on the Muppets.
That and the Count from Sesame Street,
he's a Muppet. The Sesame Streets are Muppets.
They are. I don't know, because I think the character development is different from.
But they are literally Muppets.
Well,
I will fight you on this one.
I'll say puppets, not Muppets. Is where I
no see that's the thing. Muppets are different than puppets, and that's what the Muppets have more mobility than a puppet does. That's what makes them Muppets.
But we'll need to bring somebody on for that one next.
We'll ask our guest here in a second. Which, for those of you that are like, "Hey, this looks completely different." First of all, the setup isn't completely different. That just means you didn't watch the video last week, so you can go back and see. Although we do have more light this time.
Yeah, shout out to my mom for one of those suggestions. We'll still keep working on it.
Yeah, hopefully you can actually see Brandon now and you don't have a giant glare off my forehead. But with all that being said, we are doing a little bit of a different recording software, I guess is really what it is.
Yeah.
We have a different software. Hopefully this is working well. It allows us to do some more fun stuff with it. This also is what allowed us to do the live stream. Those of you that joined in last Thursday, this is the stuff that we're going to be using from now on. So bear with us today because we're learning a new technology.
Yeah, probably the first few weeks it'll be a little bit different, but don't worry. The same places where you get our podcast will still be there.
All of that is the same. Formats are all the same there. The soundboard is coming next time. So I haven't given up on it. It's just we had to get this up first. But speaking of technology,
that
is actually what we are talking about today. but you've all heard my spiel on it over and over and over. So we brought in an expert to do this as well. And assuming that I hit the right button, you can now see him. This is Dr. Joshua K. Smith. He's a pastor. He is a doctor, obviously. And he's written 2 books. He's writing his 3rd. And today he is here to talk about the theology of robots and artificial intelligence and all that plays into it. And this should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think it'll be great. So welcome, Josh. Good morning.
Oh, thank you guys. Good morning to you.
So we're going to start off, and we like to start off by defining our terms. So let's start off by actually, what are we talking about when we say the word robot, when we talk artificial intelligence? What's the difference? What are these things? What is it we're actually talking about today?
Who knows? It's like one of those things where you ask a bunch of roboticists and AI experts, and they're still debating this to this day. And so I'll try to make it as simple as possible because, the terms float around. It's not ironclad or anything like that. So when we think about AI, and I stole this from a friend, and when we think about AI, I like to think of it as a type of recipe. It's your on one side of the spectrum, you have just simple inputs and outputs, and that's what it is. It's a program that's making predictions based on what you give it. Then on the other side of the spectrum, it's not only making predictions but evaluating those predictions. And so that's more of the AI that I talk about. And so that's why it gets convoluted and people get upset when you say just generally AI. But when you go back to the original coining of the term in the 1950s, I think what they meant was a machine that thinks like a human. Now, we know obviously now that the machine is not going to think like a human does. It's very different. The mathematical models that it uses, we don't think in math so much. I mean, some people do, don't get me wrong. But for the
Nobody on this side of the camera thinks in math.
But I mean, quite literally, how our brain works, it's very different, right? And we have a very holistic way of thinking, and or sometimes just very sporadic and random way of thinking. But the models that we use in AI and different things, like it's for most people, it's just math, okay? And I think that's fair. But one of the ways that I like to describe it is just like that. It is basically inputs and outputs, models, math, recipes. If you want to bake a cake, you need these sets of ingredients. If you do it right, you're going to get these outputs, and that's what simple AI is. Now
So
it
does
gets
AI
even.
seem like the definition of it is more of a moving target, as you talked about,
Mhm.
maybe from the 1950s, and as we continue on, that it's got a core base of like the input output, but the definition is fluid.
Right, and because so are the models, and so are the programs. Right, when we say AI, we're not just talking about one set of models and programs. There's so many, and machine learning in general is very complex for people who don't know what the math is. And so and I'm not saying that I even understand everything about the math and all that stuff, or machine learning, or AI, but and that's not really my goal. It's more or less to bring in Christian communities and others who are outside of these circles into the circle and say, these are some questions we need to be asking as well. And yeah, so it's quite frustrating when you try to ask somebody, what do you mean when you say AI? And I think likewise with robot, it's the same way. So I ask my son this sometimes. I say, what is a robot? And he'll say, it's a machine. Well, what is a machine? It's a robot. And so, um, in some ways, that's how it really is. So technically, we know the robot is, actuators, sensors, those type of things. The embodied presence of these models that take in data and then evaluate and make decisions. Okay, yes, technically that is what it is. But we have a tendency to try to reduce everything down to its basic atomized self. And like when we ask, what is a human? Okay, it's also, or what is life? It's equally hard to define it. Well,
Yeah.
life is a process between birth and death. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, technically, but that's like an AI gave an answer, right? That's technically what it is, yes, but explain that, and it doesn't. I don't have any great definition that explains AI or robots
So
completely.
if we
Yeah, go
want
ahead.
to kind of simplify the difference to start
Hmm.
with,
Yeah.
Roomba would
Yes.
be robot,
Uh huh.
not AI.
Um.
Non
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna
It's
say
gonna be that
just
fine line
yeah, I
again.
know it's a fine line, but in terms of what we're talking about, because there's robots that can do artificial intelligence, and you can program them to do a lot of thinking.
Hmm.
But when we're talking artificial intelligence, we're also more talking about almost the non-playable characters video game type thing
Yeah.
where
Hmm.
they are programmed to do certain things, but they're also able to do things on their own if they really wanted to.
Sure. Yeah.
So, with all of that, like you said, your goal is not to actually define these things. Your goal is to start making people actually think about these things. We know all too well because you and I have kind of led some debates almost already on Twitter about some of this stuff. The church in general and technology don't seem to get along post 1920.
Yeah.
Why is this such a big deal for the church, both technology wise in general, but also why is it that the church actually needs to understand what this stuff is that's coming out right now?
Yeah. It's all religious. And all of these things that we've created are religious objects or religious entities that we want to make, and they are driven by a theology. Now, it may not be a Christian theology, and I would argue that a lot of times it's not. But when I talk about the definitions discussion, if we ask those same people, especially computer scientists, what is a human? They actually fall rather closely to what a lot of Christian complementarian thinkers would say. So I thought that's fascinating, and I began to ask why. Why are we so close on one thing and then so far away on other things? And I think sometimes it's because we miss the, to use a big word, like the metaphysical underpinnings of all this conversation and where it comes from. And even before 1920, if you go back to the Middle Ages, there was a intertwining of technology and theology that, I mean, it drove a lot of science. It drove a lot of architecture and a lot of crazy stuff that comes out of, I think, a religious devotion to the Christian God, but also this struggle with wanting to usher in a new millennium. And so, if you look at the language of Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and others, it's very religious. Now, they may not say that they're a religious person, they believe in Jesus, all that stuff, but um, a lot of them are probably more religious than we are because, I mean, just think about what Musk has sacrificed to uh, achieve his vision. Billions of dollars, and, lots of sleepless nights and lots of sacrifice to do that. Like, I don't know that I've sacrificed that much for, my calling to ministry, or, maybe I have, but I mean, that's a huge cost. And then for
Yeah.
people to, and then do that publicly. And Musk is just one example. There's many others. Christopher Columbus was one of those people, like, thought he was the Messiah in some ways, going to usher in this new millennium, just like crazy stuff, right? Um, and technology becomes the implement of how we achieve that vision. And so it's not only an important discussion to have as Christians and theologians or whatever. But I mean, like this, I don't know that there is another conversation we should be having right now, because now we have the implements at our disposal. I mean, just to imagine some of these medieval thinkers, if they would have had, you know, microchips, microprocessors, and all these things, and like the great harm that could have come from some of those visions, or this is all pre like women's rights. This is pre, rights for people of color. I mean, all this stuff. Like, you think about that one vision, one group of visionaries, when they have all the money and the power, and then you add implements, technology to that. Oh, it's very dangerous.
Hmm.
And we could just argue that with the Bible, you know.
Yeah, which is what we like to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned in your book a little bit of a lot of Christians, or I shouldn't say a lot, some of the conversations you have with Christians are saying, this isn't something that we need to talk about right now because we're not there
Right.
yet. How do you address that pushback? We're
Yeah,
not there yet.
yeah. That goes back to the question of why we always start with definitions, right? So, um, I like to go around that question, but the reason people ask that question is because they say, "Well, we don't have to worry about that yet because that's not where we are." Okay, um, and okay, but the point is we don't know when we'll be there.
Mhm.
And it's like saying, okay, we know 200 years from now, let's just go back 200 years. We say, okay, 200 years from now, we might possibly be in environmental crisis, or we might be approaching some massive pandemic. To say, okay, well, we're not there yet, so we shouldn't think about it. Like that's just poor logic, right? You don't do that. If you have foresight enough to know something might be coming that's worth discussing. To say like, I don't know, that's almost like malpractice in a way. He's like, well, we'll worry about that later.
Just
Well,
kind of burying your
it's
head in the sand.
It's interesting
yeah.
too that you bring the way you brought that up, because I saw recently that there was I was never into World of Warcraft. That was not my online game. But
Were you a RuneScape guy?
when I actually once we actually had internet for me to be able to do games and stuff, I've always been much more of a Civ,
Okay.
Civilization, Sid Meier's, all that. But yeah, see, he knows what's up. But there was, I guess, an actual plague that struck World of Warcraft back in like 2008. I think is when it was, something like that, where it was literally an artificial intelligence glitch that caused there to be a plague that went through, that was spread through through artificial human contact. And so Blizzard actually put out quarantine measures saying you need to stay indoors and avoid contact with people or your person is going to die. And there was actually groups of people that got together and that were saying, you know what, this is all a big conspiracy to prevent us from seeing what this new update is. And so they would get together, and sure enough, the plague kept on spreading and dying to the point where Blizzard finally just had to shut the server off and reset it because everybody was not following quarantine procedures. And they looked at this, and epidemiologists were like, this is literally what is going to happen if we actually have a plague hit the earth, because this is a very good study. Artificial intelligence mixed with human motion just showed us exactly what is going to happen.
Yeah.
And everybody discounted them until 2020 hit. And we saw the exact thing that happened with artificial intelligence in World of Warcraft happen. Because everybody, like you said, the question of, well, we're not there yet, so why does it matter, meant that nobody was planning for it. And the people that were planning for it were ignored.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with the movie Encanto with the whole thing of Bruno.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He saw it coming, tried to warn everybody, and was ignored. And so we're going to continue this conversation with Dr. Smith here after we have a word from our sponsors.
We'll be right back.
Today's a great day to start your own podcast. Whether you're looking for a new marketing channel, have a message you want to share with the world, or just think it would be fun to have your own talk show, podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your online reach.
Buzzsprout is hands down the easiest and best way to launch, promote, and track your podcast. Your show can be online listened on all major platforms within minutes of finishing your first recording. We just switched to Buzzsprout for Season 2 and have immediately noticed the difference.
With Buzzsprout, you get a great-looking podcast website, audio players that you can drop into your websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and more. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and Buzzsprout and the Misfits want to help you get started.
Contact us for a free consultation call, and then visit our affiliate link to get started with Buzzsprout. Using this link not only helps support the Misfits, but it also gets you a $20 Amazon gift card. The teams at Buzzsprout and Ministry Misfits are passionate about helping you succeed. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. To find out more, go to www.ministrymisfits.com/affiliates.
We're back.
All right, everybody, welcome back. We are talking robots. We are talking artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
We let the doctor talk math because we already
We're bad at that, yeah.
But we are now going to start moving through a little bit. We kind of discussed the basic definition and distinction between robot and AI as far as what we're talking about here. You know, what we kind of landed on was robot, think Roomba, artificial intelligence, think non-playable characters. Now we've talked a little bit also about the history of all of this, that it's there. We talked about where some of the fears are coming from, where the lack of fear where it should be is coming from. Why we're even having this discussion is all because of that. People aren't talking about it. So now, Dr. Smith, those of us that have seen iRobot know that there are supposedly the 4 laws of robotics, and that the robots can't break it and artificial intelligence can't break it, but when they do, they're going to destroy us all. What actually, because this is an important piece to all of this, is there is actually, especially for us as believers, there are ethics involved in just about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we start talking robots and artificial intelligence and technology, especially as it relates to believers, get into a little bit about the ethics behind all of this, because it's more complicated than iRobot makes it look, but it's less complicated than a lot of the fear-mongering pastors are going to make it sound.
Yeah. Well, we always start with sci-fi, I guess. The conversation always circles back there because for most of us, unless you have experience, like I program robots in high school and we've built things, and unless you've had experience with them, I guess that would probably be the best thing for a lot of people. Just go work with a robot, and then you'll be less afraid. But sci-fi, Skynet, whatever. That's not what I'm worried about, and that's not what scares me the most. And like you're saying about ethics, I think that's more terrifying to me is the human side of artificial intelligence and robotics, because everything that goes into that technology is undergirded by a philosophy, a theology even. And so if that person doesn't believe that human life matters, or that only certain human life matters, or there's a lot of assumptions built into the technology we make. And I believe every technology has a desired end, right? And so a weapon system is not meant to be a humanitarian system, right? And so and it's intentionally designed that way. And so there's some things I think we need to have conversations about in ethics. And the first one is to actually have a conversation, because many times computer scientists and others, it's not their fault, but even engineers, right? There's not much room in the pedigree for those types of discussions. And you could sit with PhDs and who have, engineering PhDs, who have computer science PhDs, and ask them how many courses they took on ethics, or if they even took one. And so, um, and it's not their fault. Like, I'm not saying that they haven't read anything on ethics or anything like that, but this is like all I do. It's a eat and breathe, moral philosophy and theology, and analytical and continental philosophy. And so that's a big part of theology. And so I
That
think,
we
go ahead.
we kind of got into that with Dr. Barr a little bit, just talking about pastoral ministry.
Mhm.
Is, you talk to a lot of pastors about how many history classes they've taken. There's not many that have taken extensive history courses.
It's more
Mhm.
of a specialty than
You know,
overall.
right?
Yeah, for sure.
And we see the same results there. It's a little bit of a difference between, a history course for a pastor and an ethics course for a roboticist, but the end result ends up being the same thing. And we're going to start throwing out some of our terminology here with what you're saying, because you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing you say really is that, these are deep philosophical questions.
Hmm.
These deep philosophical questions are rooted in theology.
Oh yeah,
And this is how we determine the method we program our robots to do.
sure.
What that is, for those that couldn't tell and that have been listening for a while, is what he literally just described was our 3 tiers.
Mhm.
For Dr. Smith, the 3-tier paradigm is what we use here on our
Mhm.
show. It comes out of Dr. Linville's books on sports ministry, but we've now taken and expanded out beyond sports. Of our Christocentric theological
Mhm.
truths are laid out on the forefront and the basis for everything and the foundation for what we do. Our philosophies are built out of this. They're biblically based if we're believers, but they are built off of our theology that shows us how Christ is at the center of everything. And
Mhm.
then out of that thinking is how we can determine the method that we go about doing everything. And, we can start off a couple of the theologies that you've already brought up, and you can expand on this. Going back to the first, right before our break, when we were talking about why people aren't having these conversations, and the idea of, well, we're not there yet, or we're never going to get there, really is built off of a poor eschatology, which we've talked about multiple times on here before, but especially it sounds a lot of the dispensationalist views of eschatology, as far as where technology plays in all of this, as far as when God's going to rapture, all of that sort of stuff. Do you see that as part of why we aren't having these conversations right now in our churches?
Well, yeah, it could be. Could be that. I think too. Like I said, it all depends on your philosophical assumptions about life and your worldview, and it's so hard to pinpoint a particular, like, one reason. I think it's multiple. Um, and one of the things that I see in the trajectory of the churches dealing with this is we like to swing pendulums pretty hard. So in the Middle Ages, it was all utopian, like technology is going to usher in the new Eden. We're gonna, but I don't think that if you look at the biblical accounts, and especially the Book of Revelation, things like that, it's only getting progressively worse. And so some people now they take that and say, well, technology is, our phones are killing us, or and like, I get all that, but at the same time, like, there are authors, I won't name them. They bemoan technology, but at the same time, they make a 4K video promoting their new
Right.
book on technology
They use
with
it, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're not like anti-technology per se, but they're like, we should look at the Amish for how we. I'm like, we're a bit hypocritical if we go there. And so in my book, Robot Theology, and uh, I'll just that one's fine. It's a short work about how we have a complexity to this view, in that if we put Jesus in the center of it and ask, the cheesy question of what would Jesus do. I like to ask, what would Jesus augment if I'm talking about
Ooh,
bioethics? Um, we're doing a
we
series
need to
on that
make
in our
that
church.
into a bracelet.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yes, we do. Um, and think about that because I use him as my limiting um, rubric. Like, okay, I know Jesus probably wouldn't make a sex robot or a autonomous weapon system. I'm pretty sure, like, even though he didn't talk about those
Hmm.
things, I'm pretty sure that doesn't fall into his ethic of non-retaliation and loving your enemy. Okay. What about cell phones? What about social robots like you know, the ones that treat autism spectrum disorders? Well, I think
Hmm.
okay, yeah, I think Jesus would be for that. He's for healing. He's for, there's a lot of statistical analysis about how we could use those robots for good. Well, okay, well, but there's still this gradient to it. And we can't say yes or no all the time. And there's like extreme spectrums of like violence that, yeah, I think there's some we could just say no to. But the most of the technology that we're talking about in the local church is not those forms, right? We're not talking about treating pedophilia with them. We're not talking about all that extreme stuff, although we should be. We're not doing that either, and that is, undergirded by a theology of well. Like, we believe just
Hmm.
war is okay. We believe that these systems in just war are okay. Well, let's challenge that. I don't think Jesus would be okay with drones in warfare, but because it's a human in the loop, oh well, we're good. No, no, we're not. Like, let's unpack that a little bit. And
You
why
know,
would he not
it's.
be good? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say it's interesting though because I think if we actually were having those kind of conversations and asking those questions, the conversation would very quickly change from
Mm,
a what do you think about the ethics of these technologies to a actual we're going to get very very deep theological opinions on who people actually see Jesus as.
Mm.
mm,
This is what we refer to as Cold War theology. This is what Kristen Dubé talks about in Jesus and John Wayne.
mm.
The amount of people just this week even that I saw conversations about whether or not Jesus is calling for people to take up arms and fight.
Oh, yeah.
The view that they have of Jesus, their level one theological truths about who Jesus is completely affects everything else that they think about and what they do. And so when we start asking, well, do you think Jesus would be okay with even
Mm,
not even going into the drones, which is still kind of up in the air ethically,
Hmm.
militarily speaking, and militaristically.
That was good.
I got it out that time.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking, just even looking at what's going on in Ukraine right now about the
mm.
use of some of the bomb technology that Russia has dropped on civilians. Would Jesus be okay with that?
Mm,
Is the question, even in a just war theology. And depending on whether or not you view Jesus as the one that says, go out and buy a sword, or Jesus saying, Peter, put your sword away, what are you doing? Completely changes the conversation as far as whether or not developing drones is even an issue or not.
yeah. Mhm.
Another one that you bring up in your book that we want to spend a little bit of time on before we take another break here is you go into deep depth not death, depth, deep depth on the connection between ethics and theology of artificial intelligence and our understanding of the Imago Dei.
Mm.
Start walking us through that a little bit, because I think this is really where a lot of, at least some of the pastors I know that are very fearful of artificial intelligence, even
Yeah.
Siri on their phone, is this really is where the rubber meets the road.
Hmm.
How do we deal with the idea of Imago Dei and artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I think we want to be unique and distinct, and we don't want to make room in our theology for any other being for equal or even similar moral consideration, because then that impacts not only our status before God, which I don't think that it does, but a lot of people view it that way, but it also impacts how we live ethically in this world. Because if we consider a chicken, as made in the image of God, then we can't eat it anymore. So just being very practical, I mean, like, that takes Chick-fil-A off the menu, right? Um, that that in,
That's heresy right there.
exactly, yeah. I mean, you see very quickly um, in someone's theology, well, okay. And I like to reverse engineer some things there. In my own reading of the Imago Dei, is I think it has more to do with what we understand about idols and imaging and the similar words that are used. That these reflections, they either worship God, and or they undo that image and they reverse it. And so I think similarly, that's how we are to understand the image. Now, I know there's a big, massive theological library that you could unpack with that, and there's lots of debates. But I think Jesus and God, they leave it ambiguous for a reason, because, like you said, like we always start this conversation with, we wanted to limit, define, um, and I think Jesus gives us room to open up and broaden categories. And I even think about this in race issues and race science all the time. What is a white person? What is a black person? What are, biologically, what makes, where do we, draw the lines? And um, we have very hard lines in our mind. We do. But theologically, you can't draw them, and so I think that's why my view of the Imago Dei is a broadening of the circle of moral consideration, and that's where my view leads to. I don't think it's properties based, so that's this idea that, well, maybe it's in intelligence, or maybe it's in language, because the more and more research that we get, especially from the scientific community, is that we're really not that distinct as an animal, so to speak, right? I know we're more than that. Okay, I get that. For anybody who throws stuff at me, but you know, it's it's also more complicated because we are in this relationship with the world, right? We are sustained by it. We are sustained by animals, and I don't think that's the intentional design. If you go back to the garden, I think we're
Right.
supposed to exist in harmony, and now we are in rebellion against nature. And it's not that nature's in rebellion against God. No, no, no. It's humans are in rebellion against nature, and then also in rebellion against God through nature. And so, um, that's kind of how I've started to read it. And that reading allows me to think about the earth and its creatures differently. I am a creator, yes, but I'm not a dominator. I'm not a conqueror of the world. I'm I'm a gardener. Like, I still believe that that is my original design, is to garden, and not conquer as a king or queen or whoever, but to be a maintainer, and that is a test of my faith before God and my dependence upon His creation. And so I think a lot of people read Genesis 1:26 through 27 as we are the pinnacle of creation. We are the masters of creation. And that's just not true. You know, put them in a desert for a week. You're not going to master it. You're not going to subdue the desert. Like, I mean, it's going to destroy you. Um, and so there's a lot of submission that we struggle with in just that one chapter. And I think a lot of theology that's been very harmful, especially to women and children over the years.
Mm,
And so, and that's why I bridge it to robots and artificial intelligence and potentially even, you know, non-biological humans or artificial children, these entities that are very much going to be on the horizon where it's it shares my DNA, but it's also manufactured in a sense. Um, and it's not that we can't do it; it's just how much is legally acceptable right now. And
mm,
so, you know, if a child is created in a lab, is it less than a human? Um, you know, like is it morally, ethically less than a human? Well, I would say no. I think you know, it needs to be treated with equal dignity and respect, and worthy of life. You know, and so likewise with animals and things like that. And this is what it really challenges people when you think about pain, suffering, our
mhm.
connection to all these things is, and I'm on a journey too. Like I'm on a journey thinking about these things, and um, you know, there's 3 or 4 chicken plants here where I live. It takes more wheat, soy, to feed one chicken than the chickens actually feed humans. Right? It's like a 9-to-1 ratio. Like economically, it just doesn't make sense, and it's not sustainable. But because we love chicken sandwiches, because you know, like we justify these things in our mind, and we think that's crazy, you know. But it doesn't stop with a chicken sandwich, right? And we've done all kinds of crazy stuff in the past and justified all kinds of. And who's to say what we will justify in the future?
Right.
Like you're saying, it all starts with this question of who is God, how do I relate to Him, and how do I relate to His creation? And it gets messy real quick.
Yeah, I was gonna say it definitely gets messy because even as we talk through this, and I've been thinking about it more. One, I break down initially the robots as you said, some of it for good, where it's helping us clean our house or mow the lawn, or simply in a manufacturing sense, helping complete a job that's mundane. And then I think there's also the technology implements where it's involved medically,
Mhm.
Hmm.
where it's okay, we're reproducing an organ or a human body part, and where does that even fall into, or as you've talked about, creation of a human, like where does that all fall in God's image, and where do we draw that line of us being the creator versus God being our ultimate creator? And then even looking ahead of where we're kind of going into with this metaverse, where I see a lot of people separating themselves, of almost numbing themselves out of this world to, okay, I don't want to deal
Right.
with this hurt and pain, so let me put my life and
Hmm.
full representation into somebody else that I don't want to pick up that imago Dei. I don't care that God created me and who I was represented to be. I want to be
Well, and
represented differently
it
in
may
somebody
not
else.
even be that, because again, this is where when we start looking at our theology, we start looking at everything. When we those that want to close themselves off from the suffering of this world, whether it's perceived suffering or actual experienced suffering, them wanting to go to a place where they have more perceived control may not be a denial of who God made them. It would be much more of a denial of the supremacy that God is still in control, even in the chaos.
Hmm.
And we don't want to make a judgment of somebody that wants to spend more time online than in
Yeah.
person,
Hmm.
that they have that they've completely, because this is the argument from a lot of people, on all the different identity theology stuff. This is the argument from people talking technology, as far as it's much bigger than just, oh, they have an identity crisis or they're depressed or something like that, but they want to make it they are in sin because they have denied who God has made them to be. They're denying the holy discontent. When in reality, it may just be that they're searching for a feeling of control while everything else is circling out of control, which is much more of we still have an idolatry issue, but it's not an idolatry of wanting to put yourself above God. It's a matter of an idolatry issue of not recognizing what God is doing and thinking that you're going to be able to do it better yourself.
But I do think a lot of people, especially in, we'll say 2K, for example, you build
2K.
you build your avatar. And so you pick a different race, or, okay, I wish I had different abilities. I wish I was taller. I wish I could dunk like my character. So I do think there is still
You mean you can't dunk?
No, I can't. No.
Okay.
But I do think there is that wanting or disappointment in our human abilities or inabilities to do something. So I'll create a character or multiple characters to, again, give me that sense of power that I am accomplishing because I can't do it or don't want to try to do it in the physical sense.
Right. And that is a little bit different than what we're seeing with the metaverse.
Yeah.
The metaverse is much more about just putting yourself out of reality. Video games.
I don't know. I think I would push back against the reality aspect of it, because I think what we're finding is that maybe the desire to extend our finiteness or maybe circumvent it, but doesn't make it less real as far as its psychological impact on your mind. And so I think I think we need to have that caveat with people in this discussion, is that it is a real environment for them. Is it real as like, if you sexually assault somebody in there, you could still, be legally charged. And I think what we'll see is a blurring of lines here between these different realities, so to speak. But I don't think it makes it less real for people as far as their perceived experience. And like I said, I don't want to. There's always this gradient that we have to explore, that we don't like. We like binaries, black or white, yes or no. But I don't think that's not what I get when I see Jesus in dialogue with people. And it's never what you want to hear, but it's what the truth is. And I think for a lot of people, just look at the world that we experience. And I say we're hypocrites all the time, because it's like, okay, well, I'll go sit and watch Netflix or watch Disney Plus or whatever, and or watch sports or whatever, or hunt, whatever your leisure is or hobby. Okay, and so what we do is we say, okay, this one's acceptable and this one's not. And but really they're all the same. You're trying to either relieve stress or connect with people who are like you. I mean, don't let it be lost on people how ironic it is for people to make podcasts and then bemoan, like, hey, like, this isn't real. Like, well, we're not physically in the same room together. So like, it's ironic, right? So I think a lot of what is happening is now there are spaces for people who felt marginalized. Who, think about people who weren't able to get out and be a part of things, and we're coming off 2 years of that. So I think we need to give people some grace, that it's not just because they want to escape reality. It's not just because they're a weirdo or whatever. Like, this is a real chance for people to connect when they may be afraid, they may be unable, they may have autoimmune deficiencies. And so and I talk to people and try to, there are some people who absolutely want to escape. I want to escape. I feel that pressure too. But, not everything that I do is about escapism. And not all technology is about that. Some of it is.
Right.
But that's for the individual to answer, not for me, like you guys are saying, not for me to make that judgment on them. And I just want listeners to understand that because even with dealing with widows and stuff as a pastor, they all feel this alienation that I want to be somewhere I can't be, either due to pain or autoimmune problems, or just they can't drive, and how isolating that is for a human. And so
Mhm.
I know most of them are not going to go, on the metaverse or even on social media. And I'm not saying it's a substitute for embodied contact and touch and love and all those things. But goodness, like it is something, okay? And I think something is better than nothing sometimes. Um, and I want to do research and make things that might be a ethical, you know, not substitute, but supplement for people in those capacities. Will it be abuse? Yes, all things are abused or human, but
Mhm.
I think the grace and love of Jesus would compel us to say, okay, um, if it's ethically permissible and possible, can we use this for a kingdom good? Um, Sometimes no, we can't, but I think sometimes yes, we can.
And that's what we're going to get into here as we close out after this break is much more of the ministry applications for all of this stuff that we're talking about. So we're going to take one more quick break, and then we'll be back with Dr. Smith to talk about how we can actually use this stuff.
We'll be right back.
Season 2 of the Ministry Misfits podcast and our awesome theme song are brought to you by Laird Creative Agency.
In our social media world, the next connection is always one click or scroll away, and your business has to be ready when they find you.
That's why Laird Creative is always looking for ways to step your brand up. Whether you're looking to overhaul your brand one time with a new website or want to save money by outsourcing your graphic and media content, Laird Creative Agency is here to help. Laird Creative's mission is to take the difficulty out of the creative process. With Laird Creative, you'll find a dedicated team of artists ready to tackle any creative need that your business has, big or small.
If you're looking for an easier way to share the vision of your organization through thoughtful branding and creative content, find them at lairdcreativeagency.com to get started. Mention the Ministry Misfits podcast and get a free consultation call. Laird Creative, step your brand up.
We're back.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We are still here with Dr. Joshua K. Smith talking robots and theology, or even just to break it down further, robotic theology. And where we kind of just talked about before the break, just the history and defining both robotics and AI or artificial intelligence. And then right before this, we were just talking about specifically with theology in general and really breaking
ethics.
and ethics. Thank you. And really breaking down the Imago Dei, being made in God's image. So now, as we kind of come to a close here, we're going to talk a little bit more about the eschatology and just the
ecclesiology.
Excuse me. Thank you.
Yeah, we already talked eschatology.
Read that one too
We're
quickly.
We want to kind of break down how this actually applies for the local church, because we've talked a lot about just some personal wrestlings that you have to do with this stuff, whether it is whether it is eschatology, whether it's just general ethics, whether it's even we even got into, really, this brings up a much bigger issue of how do you even understand who God is with just general theology. But now we want to get into the ecclesiology of all of this and what this means. And really, this is a much more. I doubt you can. I'm sure you've had this, but I'd be surprised if there are many pastors left that are going to claim that this is not a relevant ecclesiological issue
Mm.
since
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah.
I mean, there if
it's sped up everything.
right, you know,
hmm
I've been preaching this for years. You've been doing this for years. But for the most part, people didn't take notice until they were required to.
So yeah, till
So
live stream. Yeah.
yeah. Let's start talking through what are the ecclesiological implications of, I can't say robot theology because all I can think of is the robot church from Futurama when we say that. So we're going to keep on going with the theology of robots so that I don't, yeah.
I got you.
What is the actual ecclesiological implications for all of this? How does this apply?
Yeah. Well, there are several authors who I think their biggest concern, especially post or whatever we are in the pandemic, we're not post it, but there's a lot of concerns about embodiment, and so so one of the things I tried to do in my book, I don't know if I did it well. It was just an introduction to it, but to really kind of challenge and start to define what we mean by embodiment, which I think most people just mean you're physically in the space. Okay. But then push back about, well, there's really no room if that's the most important critical aspect of our ecclesiology. Now I can't say it. Is that, well, what about disembodiment? Are they less than? And so I started to think about marginalized communities and people, and really we don't make space for them. And I see some of this technology might be a ministry of grace to them. Not so much so that we like substitute, um, out caring for them or anything like that, but it's something. And I think pastorally, I feel this a lot, and especially caring for widows, people who are hospitalized during COVID, people who died where I had a very close deacon slash neighbor who died during the height of COVID. I was not allowed to see him, was not allowed to pray with him. I was in the vicinity, you know, during his death and all that. But to me, that's like, I felt like I robbed a lot of my people of my calling and why they called me here to pastor them unto death. And, you know, and it was like nobody cared. I still don't think people care. Um, because we only care about what's present, and some of that has to do with attention. John Mark Comer's book his books deal with this a lot about attention and about hurry. And I think sometimes we might, especially in 2022, we're trying to get people to come back to physical church, but I don't think that's the solution in the future of ecclesiology. And I'm not
Right.
saying full sell online church or anything like that, but I think we've had this massive shift in our thinking about embodiment, and I think a full swing back to, let's just go back to 2019, our ecclesiology there. That's just not going to happen. And I think that actually might be, a grace from God because of how we viewed people in wheelchairs, how we view people with autism spectrum disorder, how we've just orchestrated the whole worship experience. Let's just be honest; it's a very ableist thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, can someone in a wheelchair go stand on your arms? Can they go to your stage platform without help? Most churches probably not,
Mm-hmm.
and my church included. Can they even get into your church? Um, and so it's like we want to be a church for all people and bring people into the kingdom of Jesus and all these things. But then there's this massive spectrum of people. We're like, to hell with you, because we're not doing anything for you. And so, guys, what I started to wrestle with in that chapter about AI and pastoral ministry and robots is how can we use these things, these objects, potentially persons, as they come into these spaces with us, not as slaves, not as a substitute for human embodiment, but as a supplement and a help, and kind of redeem some of this technology that initially it's all focused on um, warfare applications, because that's where a lot of this stuff
Right.
comes from. How can we redeem it and make it into gardening tools again, which is kind of that Isaiah prophecy about plowshares and pruning hooks.
Yep.
Is how do we as a church take this stuff and refocus it for God's kingdom?
Something you have been talking through this whole thing that I think we need to, honestly, it's probably a good place to kind of close out, is the whole COVID era argument about live stream church.
Mm.
You have one end that's saying this is not church. You can't have church unless you are in the building. Theologically, we can disprove that pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you have some that are arguing it was good for a time, every kind
Mm-hmm.
of an Ecclesiastes approach of, there's a time and a place for all of this. And the time was during the pandemic, but now we're allowed to meet again. So we throw out all of our technology again and go back to the way things were before any of this happened.
Mm.
And I think theologically, we've already shown both in this episode and other ones we've done how that's not theologically backed up either.
Mm.
I think really what we can see here from the stories you just shared is you are somebody that, like me, is very much on the churches need to embrace technology and use it as a tool, a redemptive tool, like you just talked about. But at the same time, you can hear the hurt in your voice from the fact that you were not able to be there in person for your members.
Mm.
And that, I think, is what we need to maybe close out and highlight, is that you do not have to be on one end or the other in this discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can say, that we want to be live streaming our services for those that do not want to enter the building, whether it's for an autoimmune disease, whether it's because our buildings are not ADA appropriate, which that's a whole nother conversation we're going to have eventually. I'm waiting to hear from a couple people.
Good.
Whether it's, I had somebody when we were in Cleveland who he could not come to our building because he was on the sex offender registry, and our building literally shared the fence with the local elementary school.
Yeah.
He fully admitted his sin. He
Mm-hmm.
fully had repented of it, and he wanted to be a part of a church again. And we were the only ones offering live streaming services.
Mm.
And so he's like, you are. And so, I mean, he listed me as his pastor for his parole officer, which was a little weird when the parole officer called me before he had told he had done this. But, it's possible to have an embodiment ministry and still be on the side of redeeming technology for the use within the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. Mm.
And so we're running out of time here for this one. Dr. Smith, for people that want to go further in this with you, you have your own show. Tell everybody a little bit about where they can hear more from you on all of this stuff.
Yeah, you can follow my Twitter account. I'm pretty active there, as you guys know. You can, all this information is on my website, joshuaksmith.org. The books that I'm working on, projects that I'm working on, the podcast is there, where I just speak with other experts about their perspective of robots and AI. And I'm trying to broaden it out even more to start talking about tech and religion, um, as it's become more and more prevalent to a lot of authors that these conversations are deeply religious. And so I think we're at a great time. And just to end on a positive note, there's a lot of hope on the horizon for the local church if she will be faithful to engage, because there are a lot of communities out there that are in good faith wanting to dialogue about the future of humanity and the
Mhm.
future of the planet. And so we need to just to be at the table and share our concerns. And so yeah, that's what my ministry is about as far as my writing ministry. And obviously I'm a pastor in Morton, Mississippi. It's a little town. I pastor a little country church, so if you're ever in town, come by and I'll make you some sweet tea, and we'll sit on the front
What
porch and drink coffee.
what's the
Perfect.
church's name?
North Morton Baptist Church. And we
North Morton Baptist. All right.
yeah, I do. We post our my sermons to Facebook Live. So we have several widows. We have about 40 people that watch every week. Um, and so yeah, some of them I know, some of them I don't know. But we try
We
to.
talked about it's a great way to connect, even as we're here from Ohio
Mhm,
to Mississippi. Like we can have this connection, and then
mhm.
the listeners, then from all over globally, actually can be a part of this.
It's a
Yeah.
Guten Tag to our Germany followers
That's
that
right.
have suddenly appeared back up on our feed. Glad you finally found us again.
That's right.
So, Dr. Smith, thanks for coming on. Thanks for your heart in all of this and actually having these discussions, because for the longest time it seemed like, at least for me, I felt like I was the only one trying to have these discussions. And so I'm glad somebody much smarter than me is writing books and talking about this. So we're coming to a close for this one.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully you all are at least somewhat okay with the new streaming service thing we've got here, because I honestly think it's working pretty well. We'll see how it goes.
With the soundboard, but as always,
Yes, the soundboard is coming, and I am very disappointed that I did not get my cords ready for today,
But
because
as
I had
always,
plenty of
give us
robot
feedback.
noises I could have
Oh, that
been
would've been
using this
good.
whole time.
Oh yeah.
We want to hear your feedback on how we can improve either the show, suggestions on topics we should talk about, or even just our overall setup in here. One of the best ways to do that is on Facebook. So there is a newer discussion group.
Newer at this point, yes. Yeah, the Ministry Misfits community on Facebook, go join that. It's still public at the moment. And for those that are already members, you are allowed to post on there yourselves. We have it set where you guys, if you find something that you think is relevant to either discussions we've had or to the group in general, feel free to post. I know some people don't realize on those groups that you're allowed to make your own posts, but as long as you're not trolling, we're good with it.
We'll keep it up there.
That's right. Also, you can contact us also on Twitter. I'm there. Brandon is there at Simmons Sticks for Brandon, at Ministry Misfit for me. You can find us at Ministry Misfit pretty much everywhere.
Best place to go is www.ministrymisfits.com.
That is the new website that is up and running. And so far, we've gotten good feedback from that.
Yeah, you did a great job.
I did notice a couple places I need to go back and edit the mobile, because it has our pictures flipped on the wrong person. So you're now me. So sorry.
Identity crisis.
That's right. Speaking of identities online, you're now me. Yeah. Also, Patreon. We are on Patreon. If you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/Ministry Misfits. We do have all 4 of our tiers up. They've got some awesome stuff in there as perks for those that want to donate.
Yep.
And we are about to start. I don't remember, depending on when we're releasing this, because we all know how my scheduling goes. Depending on when we're releasing this, either we are in the middle of the campaign or we are about to start a campaign. We only need, if we can find 20 patrons at any level. So that even includes 20 at the lowest level.
Which is $5.
Which is $5 a month. That will have us pretty much fully funded for the minimum amount of stuff that we are wanting to do. 20 at a different level means that it will allow us to start being able to broaden out and do some of the other things that we're looking to do. More live streams, getting better quality stuff going for the documentary, which we are about to start filming here in the next month or so. Things like that. So if you would like to become a patron, go to patreon.com/Ministry Misfits. You can see all the different levels there and be able to partner with us in that manner.
I was going to say, we've also got exclusive merch on some of those levels, but if you would just like to purchase some outside of that, it's also on our website.
Yes, the store is still up, including the Tikva tees.
The Tikva tee, which will be technically celebrating Tikva tonight at an event, which is different than the timing of this, but we will be at a event celebrating their ministry that they do for our young people in Canton.
That is correct. So, Dr. Smith, we thank you for joining us. And the rest of you, we will see you all next week.
The Ministry Misfits podcast is a production of Ministry Misfit Media in association with Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Greg Linville and Andrew Fouts are our executive producers, and Brandon Simmons is associate producer. The Ministry Misfits theme song is written and produced by J.D. Laird and Laird Creative Agency. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com or by following @ministrymisfit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also visit our website at www.ministrymisfits.com or through bio.link/Ministry Misfits. If you would like to support Ministry Misfits, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/Ministry Misfits.